Good morning. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being in the room. Over in Waxahachie, online, I hope nobody's on the front porch today. I can't imagine. If you are, you're either, no, I won't even get into it. I can't imagine you being on the porch. We are in a series called Out of Chaos and how to find peace in that. But before I get started, I just want to take a moment and talk about Mindy and Andrew's story that you just watched. I mean, isn't it incredible, the authenticity, the honesty, the grace to be able to share that story in front of all of you, because Re-Engage is such an important discipleship program that we have here at the church. And I know a lot of you are thinking, well, I can't do that. I'm not going to do that. Our marriage is okay. Well, listen, an okay marriage can be a great marriage. So I'm telling you, wherever you are in your marriage, that 16-week course is an excellent opportunity for you to put your marriage in the proper perspective. Now, some of you are like, there's no way that I can give 16 weeks. I am too busy. We're going to talk about that during the sermon. But in that moment, we also have a weekend. And so a weekend is better than nothing. And so this weekend is right at Valentine's Day. So man, you want to impress your wife? Go online and sign up and surprise them, and you will get all kinds of bonus points, I promise. So get involved in that. Marriages are so important. Once again, if our marriages are strong, our families are strong. If our families are strong, our church is strong. So we believe in it. We encourage you to get involved in it, and we hope you will. So back to chaos. I heard a rumor that they shut down TikTok. And that caused a lot of chaos for some of you in this room and listening online. Some of you don't know what you're going to do with your 4 or 5 hours a day any longer because it's shut down. Now, if you're one of the people that were making money off of it, I just want to say, I'm really sorry. If you were one of those people that were wasting an awful amount of time on it, I just want to say, I'm so glad. All that. Now, I know it's chaotic. Everything's chaotic. Everywhere you look, I mean, the news is full of chaos constantly. We hear about the wars. We hear about all kinds of financial problems. You find all kinds of controversy, all kinds of conspiracy. It's coming at us 100 miles an hour. Tomorrow, we're going to have inauguration for President Trump. He's going to bring chaos. Whether it's good chaos or bad chaos, I'll leave that to you. But if there's one thing we know he will do, is he will bring chaos. And so we want to talk about, and we've been talking about this since January, you can't stop the chaos. Listen, we can't stop it in our own life. I mean, while you're in this room, hoping you have your phone turned off, but there's going to be emails, there's going to be text, there's going to be people giving you their opinion, there's going to be all of these things coming to you constantly. And there's no place to be still, no place to be quiet. And then some of you, there's more private ones coming at you. Maybe you got that health scare, something's wrong physically, or maybe your relationship is falling apart, or your death of a loved one. There's all kinds of things constantly coming at us. And while we can't stop the chaos around us, I believe that as a follower, you can find peace in the middle of chaos. So that's why we started the year. We started the year talking about communicating with God to find a calmness in our life. Communicating with God, and once again, we wanted it to be as simple as possible because we make things way too hard. So what we ask you to do is just, when you get up in the morning, pause and just say a simple prayer, thanking God for the air you're breathing, thanking God for the home you woke up in, thanking God for the day that you get to live. As you begin to prepare for a meal, pause for a minute and thank God for that meal. As you lay down at night, thank God for the day you've just had. Just start simply by praying. And we believe that prayer can help you find peace in the chaos. Last week we talked about an easy way to study the Word of God. To open up the Bible, I encourage you to go to the New Testament. I hope all of you did that. But just read just a small portion of Scripture, just a little bit of the message, and read it and let it be applied to your life. And see what that does. And I mean, it could be simple. It could be 2 minutes. Just start somewhere. Today, we're going to talk about one that is even harder, but I think more important. So before I get into that, I want to remind you what spiritual discipline is. Spiritual discipline is like every other discipline. It is doing things right now that will enable you to do something greater later. Way too many people started January with, I'm going to read through the entire Bible. And now that is a great goal. I struggled to read the entire Bible in a year because in Deuteronomy, wow. And then I go through all of the genealogies. I have been in post-high school theology classes for 9 years. I still have to skip most of the names because I can't pronounce them. And so you get all burdened, you get all bogged down, and you just try too hard. Or you tell me, man, I'm going to pray for an hour every day. No, you're not to begin with. And so we're asking you to do these disciplines a little bit at a time to develop the muscle so you can do it more. Because God's going to fill up whatever time you give him. So today, in the hecticness, in the rushing, in the constant bombardment, in the chaos, in the overscheduled lives that we live, what if I told you there was a way to find rest? There was a way to find peace in the middle of all of this chaos. What if I told you you could experience a deeper kind of rest? You could catch your breath and it would touch your soul. Today, the discipline we're talking about is quiet time and solitude. Quiet time and solitude. Now, this isn't going off in the hills and becoming a monk. It's not isolating yourself, but it's a practice where you can connect with someone greater than you. You can connect and it will give you clarity, and it can give you purpose, and it can change your life. We need to learn the power of solitude. Listen, even if you're not a follower, we need to learn solitude. I used to have an Apple Watch, but it was too bossy. It used to tell me when to stand up. And it had this one feature, maybe yours has it, and it told me to meditate for a minute. I'm like, I can't meditate this moment. I'm busy. And I thought about that. Even the world knows how important it is to take a breath, to stop. We are so busy in our world today. We get up and we're running constantly, getting everybody ready, doing everything you can do to get ready for your day, feeding the dogs, letting them out. You're doing everything to prepare, trying to figure out what you need, what to buy at the store. You go to work, it is just as hectic there. You get home, and then another whole group of people need your attention. You put them to bed, and then you got to look at TikTok for 2 hours. There's so much. Oh, you don't have to do that anymore, so that'll help. But there's just so much to do that we never take time to stop and take a breath. I'm telling you, this spiritual discipline will help you find clarity and purpose. Now, is it important? You better believe it. It is so important that when we read the Bible, we read the life of Jesus. I'm going to go through and show you how many times in Jesus' life that he practiced quiet time and solitude. Now, this is God in the flesh. This is holy God in the flesh, the Son of God. He is walking on this earth in human form, and because of the struggles, because of the hecticness of life, and he lived in a simpler time than we do, right? All the hecticness of life, he separated himself, and he got alone. He took a deep breath, and he centered himself. And I want you to see this. I want you to understand how quiet time, how prayer, and how the scripture can help you find the peace you're longing for in the middle of life's chaos. So the first time we see Jesus get alone, he's just gone to John the Baptist and asked him to baptize him. This is the official start of his ministry. And in that official start of his ministry, it says, the very next thing that happened is the Spirit led him out into the desert. And he stayed out there for 40 days being tempted by Satan. So Jesus began the most important period of his life by being alone for 40 days. By getting away from the world, getting away from everything, and spending quiet solitude, silent moments. That's how he began. It says as his ministry went on, and his people started knowing who he was, and they started coming to him and wanting him to heal them. Now, let's be honest. Can you imagine right now if I told you Pastor Jeff Ross could heal whatever sickness you had? How many of you would try to catch him after this service? You think you would not bombard him? Well, Jesus, word got out that he could heal. And I'm not talking about the healing that you see on TBN. I'm talking about some healing where you couldn't walk and all of a sudden you can walk, you're blind, and now you can see. Well, Jesus would be exhausted. And this is how he handled it when he was exhausted. It says in Mark, very early in the morning while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. No matter what the crowds were doing, in Mark and Luke it says, but Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. When he was preparing for the Sermon on the Mount, the most famous sermon ever found in Matthew 5, 6, and 7. Before that sermon, it says he went out to a mountainside to pray, and he spent the night praying to God. When morning came, he called his disciples to him. All of these times in his life, all of these events, whether he was exhausted or whether he was preparing for something, he spent time alone. When's the last time you spent time alone? When's the last time it was quiet in your world? No phone, no television, no radio, no noise. You say, well, Pastor, nobody has time for that. If Jesus took time for that, how much more important is it for us? This next one, John the Baptist, his cousin, was beheaded. When Jesus heard, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Some of you have never even truly mourned the loss of a loved one. And listen, I've done hundreds of funerals. I know how hectic they are. I know how busy you are getting the arrangements done, and then you go straight back to work. I think many of you deal with unresolved grief because you've never spent the time quiet, solitary, alone, and dealt with the loss of some of the most important people of your life. We just keep going. We're not meant to keep going. We are meant to refresh ourselves. And Jesus, being in the form of a human, showed us that more than anybody else. I mean, I'm reading, and everywhere I read, he got alone and got quiet. He went to lonely places and found solitude. How much more important is it for us? Before he fed the 5,000, he gathered his disciples, and he didn't just do it on his own. He said, come with me by yourselves to a quiet place to get some rest. So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. After Jesus fed the 5,000, he immediately went back to the mountainside by himself to pray. When evening came, he was still there alone. All these times. Now, the most precious time that I read about is before he was about to be handed over to be crucified. Now, Jesus knew his time had come. Now, I think for many of us, we'd want to gather our friends around and our family. But you know what Jesus did? They went to a place called Gethsemane. And Jesus said to his disciples, sit here while I go off alone and pray. To prepare himself, to renew himself. Listen, we were meant to be refreshed and renewed. And the only way we can do that is quiet and solitude. It's that important. So if Jesus had to get away, how much more important is it for you? I know some of you are like, you understand, I have children. I had children too, I remember. We raised 5 kids and always had 1 or 2 extra. I get it. But I also read about John and Charles Wesley's mother. Now, John and Charles Wesley, for you history people, are the 2 brothers that founded the Methodist Church. So she did a pretty good job raising these kids, I would say. Well, she didn't have 2 children. She had 19. 19. But she patterned a godly life in front of her children. And John Wesley wrote that this mother of 19 had a quiet time every day. How did he know she had a quiet time? She would take her apron and put it over her head. And I know some of you have done that, but not for a quiet time, to scream. The children learned that when she had the apron over her head, she was praying and spending time with God, and they left her alone. So maybe some of you need to teach your kids that when I have an apron over my head, go away, leave me alone. I don't need any distractions. But if she could find time to be alone, if Jesus could find time to be alone, I mean, if you think you're too busy to have time alone, Jesus saved the world, and he found time. We need to find that time. Now, what happened? Quiet time grounds us. It grounds us in who we are. And we need that. You need to know who you are. You don't live by the world's standards. So many of us judge ourselves on what we see on social media. We judge ourselves by how many likes we get, how many views, how many comments. We live in a world that is constantly pulling us down and putting us down. We live in a world that we never quite measure up to somebody else's reels. We don't quite measure up. Our kids aren't quite as cute. We don't take as nice vacations. We don't have as expensive things. and we get beat down. Quiet times remind us of who we are. Jesus, right before he went out into the wilderness for 40 days, right before it, when he was baptized by John, it says a voice from heaven said, "This is my son whom I love. With him I'm well pleased." You think he held on to that for those 40 days? You think he held on to that the rest of his ministry as he went from place to place, as he was rejected by men, but he remembered that God loved him, he was his son, and he was pleased. When you center yourself and you spend quiet time, you realize who you are in God's eyes, and who you are in God's eyes is dearly loved. Now, if you're new to this Christianity, let me tell you something very quickly. You don't earn God's love. You don't have to keep God's love. You don't have to do things for God to love you. It is just flat out unconditional love for you. When you spend time alone, God can remind you of that. And instead of trying to measure up, you can hear him just say gently, "You're enough. You're enough. You're good enough. You're smart enough. You're beautiful in my eyes. I love you." We don't hear that enough. We need to hear that from our Maker, and that quiet time will help you. Listen, there's constant pressure around you to live up to something. There's constant pressure around you, but that quiet reflection will remind you that your worth is not based on anything except the love of God. So just spend time with God. Spend time and pause and let him show you who you are. Also, solitude opens a space for clarity and peace. Listen, let's face it, life is overwhelming. There's so much going on. Work and family, everything is coming at us. But we need to hear the voice of God. We need to hear and make a space for clarity and peace. And when we get alone, that's when we hear from God. There's a story in the Old Testament, a man named Elijah. Elijah was a prophet who had this incredible success on a place called Mount Carmel. He called down fire from heaven, and he got rid of every one of his enemies in a single blow. But there was one enemy named Queen Jezebel that scared him to death. And he fled from her. He was afraid. And it says he wound up in a cave. And in this cave, these ravens, birds, were feeding him. And he was listening for God. He wanted God to let him know what was next in his life. And the story goes, as he is in this cave, all of a sudden a mighty wind begins to blow. And he runs out from that cave and he listens for God's voice in that mighty wind. But God's voice isn't there. He goes back in and suddenly there's an earthquake. The ground begins to shake. And he runs out and he's listening for God's voice in that earthquake. But God's voice isn't there. Then a giant fire begins to roar, and he's sure that is where God's voice is going to be heard. But once again, nothing. He goes back in frustrated. He lays down in that cave. And in that solitude, in that quiet moment, he hears a whisper. And that whisper is God. Ladies and gentlemen, God is whispering to some of you, but you can't hear it. God is trying to speak to you, but you can't hear it. Because of the noise of the world and the pressure of the world and the struggles of the world and the schedules and the busyness and the meetings and the sporting events are keeping you from being quiet. If Jesus needed quiet, how much more do you? Now, once again, maybe you're new at this. And so this quiet time can really just be a moment where you sit down and ask yourself, what really matters? You'd be shocked at how much doesn't. What really matters? Sitting in that line to pick up your children from school, turning off the radio, turning off the phone, breathing in and out. Ask yourself, what really matters? Because it's not going to be what you eat that night. It's not going to be getting to soccer practice. It's not going to be what's happening the next day. Let God speak to you. Make time. Quiet time and solitude create space for that whisper. As you juggle your life, take that moment. It'll reset your day. Take that deep breath. Then finally, solitude gives you strength for what's ahead. gives you strength for what's ahead. Before Jesus went through that crucifixion, he got alone and he got quiet and he prayed. Life is demanding. Raising kids is hard. Working long hours. Just trying to figure things out is tough. And you're running on empty. Your solitude, quiet time, is not stepping away from responsibilities. It's stepping forward renewal. You ever tried to use your iPhone when the battery's almost dead? Listen, I don't think I can find my way home without the iPhone anymore. But when it's dead, it's dead. And that's how some of you are living your life. You never take time to recharge. You never take time for yourself to recharge, to renew. I watch a lot of football. Watch the Chiefs cheat their way into the division playoff. No, they didn't cheat. The refs did. It's a different whole thing. But I thought about it as I was watching these teams play, and I thought, what if tomorrow they played the divisional playoff? What if tomorrow they had to play again? What kind of game would it look like if these professional athletes, these incredibly in-shape people, had to play 3 or 4 games in a row? It'd be ridiculous. Well, folks, that's how some of you are living your life. Every minute, every day, packed full, trying to make it through. And without rest, without solitude, without quiet, you're not going to make it. When's the last time you heard quiet? This morning, when I was praying about the sermon, it kind of disappointed me because we have noise in our bedroom to sleep. We're so used to noise that we have to have white noise on to sleep at night. No, don't judge me. Most of you the same way. And I thought, I'd like to hear the quiet, but quiet makes us uncomfortable. It makes us uncomfortable. But quiet is meant for us to refresh, to renew, for God to center us on who we are, for God to give us clarity, for God to speak, for God to prepare us for what's ahead. And so my challenge to each and every one of you today is to find time to spiritually recharge your life. It's an invitation for you to start small. It may only be 5 minutes. It may be when you get up and get that cup of coffee, to sit quietly, to add that prayer, to maybe open up the Bible and to read a passage, but just give God some time and get quiet for a moment. Now, some of you can't do that in the morning. I said, okay, I get it. I think it's better in the morning, but if you can't do it in the morning, do it in the evening. Do it at 10 o'clock at night. Do it whenever works for you, but put into your schedule just 5 minutes, just 10 minutes maybe. Don't try to do an hour. Just 5 or 10 minutes, and just pause and just say what you're grateful for. What do you need clarity? Maybe God's trying to whisper something to you, but it's so noisy you can't hear it. You'd be surprised what that calm will do, what that deep breath will do. Pausing. Begin to carve out a few moments and watch how God can transform you. Can I pray that over you? Father God, God, this is a lesson for me as well, for everyone listening. To find quiet, to find solitude, to find clarity and purpose, to know who I am in you, to hear your voice speak, and to be prepared for what's ahead. God, speak to our hearts, but God, help us to find that quietness of the moment. Father, thank you.